The red wine left her glass like a slow-moving curse, splattering across his suit in a quiet explosion of crimson. In that single motion, Bianca Richardson signed the death warrant for her family's $2 billion empire. She just didn't know it yet. The chandeliers of Manhattan's Rosemont Hotel dripped light like liquid gold, scattering across crystal glasses and diamond cuffs. Laughter floated above the string quartet, the kind of cultivated laughter that only the wealthy learn to perfect. Then, in a single breath, the music died. Bianca Richardson stood at the center of a silence. Her gown, silver silk, slit to the thigh, caught every glimmer of light. Her smile was the kind photographers chased, confident, knowing, slightly cruel. She raised her half-empty glass, the stem trembling just enough to draw eyes. A tall black man stood beside her table, posture calm, expression unreadable. "I said refill my glass," she drawled, "not stand there staring at me like a statue." Every sound in the ballroom folded in on itself. Somewhere, a waiter froze mid-pour. A phone camera lifted above the crowd. Bianca tilted the glass. The red Cabernet spilled out in one smooth ribbon, splattering across the man's charcoal suit. Gasps broke through the air like shattering glass. The wine slid down his sleeve and onto the white tablecloth, blooming dark and slow, blood on snow. Bianca's voice cut the tension like a blade. "Maybe next time you'll know your place." Her companion stared, horrified but motionless, prisoners of etiquette. The man did not shout or recoil. He simply reached into his pocket, produced a folded handkerchief, and dabbed the stain with quiet precision. "Interesting choice, Mrs. Richardson," he said. That was all. Calm, steady, almost kind. It was the moment before the storm broke, the last fragile breath before a billion-dollar empire began to burn. If this story resonated with you, like, subscribe, comment, and let me know in the comment section where you're watching from and help us let the video to go viral. She had no idea the man she'd humiliated was Robert Jules, the CEO of Jules Global Holdings, the firm about to sign a $2 billion partnership with her husband's company, Richardson Estates. She had no idea the cameras trained on her would, within hours, turn her name into a headline and her face into a symbol. She had no idea she'd just destroyed everything. 12 hours earlier, Bianca Richardson had been worrying about her manicure. Morning sunlight streamed through the penthouse windows on the Upper East Side, bouncing off glass vases filled with imported orchids. James Richardson, her husband, stood by the window in a dark suit, scrolling through market reports. His jaw was tight, his coffee untouched. "This deal is the biggest in the company's history," he said without looking up. $2 billion. Jules Global is evaluating our proposal tonight. If it goes well, we expand into London and Dubai. Bianca barely listened. She was examining earrings, emerald drops or diamonds. Emerald said sophisticated. Diamonds screamed dominant. She chose both. "Relax, darling," she murmured. "You close the deals. I close the rooms." James turned to her. "I'm serious, B. Jules himself will be there." "Robert something," she said, waving a hand. "One of your investors?" "He's not just an investor. He's the CEO, the decision maker. He runs one of the largest private equity firms in the country. Without him, this partnership dies." Bianca's eyes flicked toward him, half amused, half bored. "Then you'd better impress him." She walked away, silk whispering against the marble floor. In the mirror, her reflection looked flawless. Hair sculpted, lips the color of expensive wine. Power, she believed, was mostly appearance. If you looked untouchable long enough, people treated you that way. James, meanwhile, rehearsed talking points under his breath. Every detail mattered: tone, handshake, timing. For him, the gala was a culmination of years of negotiation and sleepless ambition. For Bianca, it was theater. By evening, the Rosemont Hotel glittered like a glass palace. Limousines lined the entrance, photographers jostled for shots, and a red carpet wound toward the ballroom doors. Bianca basked in every flash of light. She thrived on being watched. Inside, she floated from table to table, air-kissing acquaintances, judging gowns, trading gossip. The city's elite orbited around her. She spoke in half-whispers about art auctions, board seats, and vacations that cost more than salaries. Somewhere across the room, James shook hands with a group of investors. Bianca noticed the tall black man nearby, speaking to hotel staff, and arched a brow. "You'd think they'd keep the help off the floor," she murmured to a friend. The friend gave a nervous laugh and changed the subject. Moments later, the same man began walking toward her table. Bianca didn't recognize the calm authority in his stride or the weight of the gazes following him. She saw only what her world had trained her to see: status, color, hierarchy. When he stopped beside her chair, she mistook professionalism for presumption and politeness for subservience. The rest would unfold exactly as fate required. Back in the present, crimson streaks still dripped from the linen. The murmurs thickened. Phones recorded. A PR catastrophe was being born under the chandeliers. And as Bianca Richardson smiled her perfect smile, oblivious to the consequences, the narrator of her life might have whispered what the world was about to learn. Arrogance doesn't spill quietly. It stains. By morning, the wine would dry, the videos would spread, and the empire her husband built would begin to crumble. 12 hours earlier, the city had barely stirred awake. Sunlight crept across the marble floors of the Richardsons' Upper East Side penthouse, glinting off glass sculptures and gold-framed art. The skyline shimmered beyond the windows, towers of ambition, money, and restless power. James Richardson sat at the dining table, his laptop open, tie loosened, eyes scanning the proposal for the 100th time. It was the morning of the deal, a $2 billion partnership with Jules Global Holdings that could catapult Richardson Estates into international markets. The culmination of years of grinding, negotiating, and pretending to belong among the city's true power players. He checked the time. 8:02 a.m. The gala was only hours away. From a bedroom came the rhythmic click of high heels on hardwood. Bianca emerged like she was walking onto a stage, silk robe, hair wrapped, coffee in hand. Her reflection followed her across every mirror she passed. "You're up early," she said, voice smooth, unconcerned. "I couldn't sleep." James's tone was clipped, distracted. "It's a big day. I need everything perfect. The board's expecting confirmation by Monday." Bianca smirked, settling into the seat across from him. "You, and you're perfect." She sipped her coffee. "You do realize this isn't a Wall Street hearing. It's a party, darling. Investors love confidence, not spreadsheets." "Confidence is good," James replied, "but contracts pay the bills." She laughed softly, shaking her head. "Relax, James. You close the deals. I close the rooms." That line, delivered with casual arrogance, had become her mantra. Bianca Richardson, the woman who believed charm could rewrite reality. He looked up at her then, studying the flawless veneer, the practiced smile, the subtle air of superiority she wore like perfume. He'd once found it intoxicating. Lately, it felt dangerous. "You know, Jules Global is one of the biggest minority-owned firms in the country," James said carefully. "Robert Jules built that company from nothing. The man's a genius. We need to show respect." Bianca raised a brow. "Of course. I'm just not sure what kind of crowd this will be. They're bringing in so many new faces these days. Every event feels like some diversity parade." Her tone was light, but her words carried weight, the kind that cracked facades. James exhaled. "Bianca, please. Don't. Oh, don't look at me like that," she interrupted. "I'm simply saying these new investors don't understand our world. The elegance, the expectation. You can't fake class." He pinched the bridge of his nose. "You might want to keep that opinion to yourself tonight." She stood, setting her coffee down. "I always do." As she disappeared into her dressing room, James's phone buzzed. A message from his business partner, Andrew Pierce. Big news. Robert Jules himself confirmed for the gala tonight. This could seal it. James stared at the message, a flicker of hope rising. The CEO himself. That was a good sign. Maybe, finally, things were aligning. In the background, Bianca's voice floated through the doorway. "James, should I wear the gold or the emerald?" "The gold says power. The emerald says money." He didn't answer. His mind was already in the ballroom, shaking hands with the man who held his future. Bianca chose the gold. It always said power. By the time night fell, the penthouse glowed with perfection, polished, rehearsed, ready. Neither of them knew that in less than 12 hours, under a chandelier in Manhattan's grandest hall, that same gold would glitter beneath the red stain that ended everything. The city glittered that night like it had dressed itself for the Richardsons. The Rosemont Hotel, a palace of glass and gold, loomed over Manhattan's skyline, its mirrored facade reflecting 1,000 lights and ambitions. Chauffeurs lined the entrance, cameras flashed, and the air pulsed with the scent of wealth and champagne. The Richardsons arrived in a sleek black Rolls-Royce, its doors opening like a stage curtain revealing the evening stars. James stepped out first, composed and cautious, his nerves hidden behind a tailored suit. Then came Bianca, radiant, deliberate, and utterly in her element. Gold shimmered against her skin, diamonds winked from her ears. Every flash of the paparazzi was a spotlight, every lens a confirmation of her worth. She paused, tilted her chin, and smiled for the cameras. Not the polite kind, but the kind that said, "I belong here. I always have." "Mrs. Richardson, over here. Give us the look," a photographer shouted. She obliged, her pose as practiced as prayer. James, meanwhile, adjusted his cufflinks, glancing toward the hotel doors. His mind was already on the partnership announcement, the speeches, the contracts waiting upstairs. For him, tonight was about business. For Bianca, it was theater. Inside the Rosemont, chandeliers cascaded from the ceiling like frozen fireworks. Crystal, silk, and sound. Every inch of the ballroom glowed with indulgence. Servers moved like shadows, carrying trays of vintage wine. A live jazz band murmured from the corner. The city's elite, politicians, tech founders, real estate moguls, mingled beneath the golden light, trading smiles as sharp as their deals. Bianca exhaled in delight. "Now this," she said, looping her arm through James's, "is the kind of crowd that matters." James smiled faintly. "Just remember, this isn't a Met Gala. It's business. Try not to embarrass you." She laughed. "Darling, please. I'm your secret weapon." They were soon swept into a tide of greetings. Air kisses, empty compliments, shallow laughter. Bianca shone in it all, thriving on the artifice of the evening. Her circle of socialites gathered quickly, women dressed like royalty and armed with gossip sharper than stilettos. "Bianca, you look divine," cooed Serena Vaughn, a former model turned investor's wife. "I heard Jules Global is behind tonight's event. Quite the shift in crowd, isn't it?" Bianca's lips curved. That's what I was saying to James this morning. These corporate diversity pushes. Everyone's pretending it's about inclusion. Really, it's about optics. Investors love to look enlightened. The group chuckled, soft, complicit laughter that filled the space between privilege and ignorance. "Still," another socialite added, "they say this Robert Jules is impressive. Self-made. Brilliant, apparently." Bianca waved her hand dismissively. "I'm sure he is. But brilliance doesn't always translate into sophistication." At that, her friend smiled, the kind of smile that agreed but didn't dare say so aloud. Across the room, unnoticed by them, Robert Jules stood in quiet conversation with two senior investors. He was tall, poised, his presence commanding without trying. The tailored charcoal suit fit him like certainty. His voice carried calm authority, the kind born from substance rather than spectacle. When he laughed, it was genuine, warm, grounded, and the people around him leaned closer. Even from a distance, there was a gravity to him that the noise of the room couldn't drown out. Bianca's gaze flicked toward him once, uninterested. "You see," she said under her breath, "I knew they'd bring in new blood. He looks more like a banker than a CEO. You'd think they'd have someone grander." "Bianca," James murmured, scanning the crowd. "That is the so." She didn't hear him. She was already mid-conversation, talking about her upcoming charity gala, the one she'd mostly planned to outshine her rivals. Moments later, James was pulled aside by a cluster of reporters. "Mr. Richardson, any comment on tonight's partnership?" Cameras turned, microphones extended. He nodded to Bianca. "Just mingle. I'll be right back." She smiled sweetly, waving him off. Go seal your deal, dear. I'll handle the room. He didn't see the flicker of boredom cross her face as he walked away. She wasn't interested in the fine print. She was interested in being seen. Bianca drifted from table to table, her laughter tinkling like glass. The night blurred into a parade of pleasantries and shallow flattery. She was too busy basking in admiration to notice the watchful eyes across the room, or the way Robert Jules's calm glance lingered, recognizing something hollow behind the gold and glamour. For him, the evening was about vision and partnership. For her, it was about validation. And somewhere between the two, destiny was quietly loading its gun. By the time James returned, flushed with optimism and photo flashes, Bianca was already tipsy and radiant, surrounded by admirers. He placed a hand on her shoulder. Don't stay too far from me tonight, okay? She smiled without looking at him. Relax, darling. What could possibly go wrong? The chandeliers above seemed to tremble, as if they already knew the answer. The night had ripened into that golden hour when the powerful began to loosen their collars, and champagne replaced conversation as the evening's currency. The Rosemont Hotel's ballroom shimmered beneath its crystal chandeliers, laughter spilling across the marble like perfume. Light, intoxicating, and utterly artificial. Bianca Richardson was 3 glasses in, and for once, even she was starting to feel invincible. Her words were a little too loud, her laughter a little too sharp. The warmth of the wine had painted her cheeks with confidence. Around her, the city's elite orbited in designer gowns and curated charm, and Bianca felt she was exactly where she belonged, at the center of admiration. Another, her friend Serena asked, glancing at Bianca's nearly empty flute. Bianca tilted her head, considering, then smirked. Why not? It's a celebration, isn't it? James says we're on the verge of something historic. Serena giggled, gesturing to a nearby server for a refill. But Bianca's gaze drifted elsewhere. Across the room, near the catering station. There, a tall black man stood in conversation with 2 servers, sleeves immaculate, posture effortless. He smiled politely, gesturing toward a tray of wine glasses as if giving a quiet instruction. Bianca's lip curled. Honestly, she whispered, leaning toward Serena, you'd think they'd keep the help off the main floor. This is supposed to be exclusive. Serena's smile faltered. Bianca, I think he's. But Bianca had already turned away, laughing lightly, more to herself than anyone else. I swear, standards are slipping everywhere these days. Moments later, the hum of conversation parted like silk as that same man began making his way toward their table. His stride was steady, his expression composed, the kind of calm that commanded attention without needing to ask for it. Bianca barely noticed until he was standing before her. She looked up from her glass, slightly annoyed that anyone would interrupt mid-laugh. Good evening, he said, voice deep and smooth, carrying the quiet authority of someone used to being listened to. Mrs. Richardson, I believe you and your husband will be joining our board presentation next week. For a beat, silence hung between them. Then Bianca's laughter burst forth, bright and incredulous. You? Oh, darling, that's funny. She gestured lazily toward her glass. Maybe bring me a refill first, and then we'll talk business. The women around her froze. Serena's eyes widened. The air at the table turned cold. Conversations at neighboring tables stuttered as glances began to flicker in their direction. Robert Jules did not move. His expression remained unchanged, polite, distant, unreadable. I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding, he said softly, his voice steady as marble. I'm Robert Jules, CEO of Jules Global Holdings. Bianca's laughter caught in her throat. For the first time that evening, her practiced poise faltered. The words CEO and Jules Global hit her like cold water. But pride, that old reflex, snapped into place before humility could. She blinked, recovered her smirk, and said with a dismissive wave, Oh, right. Of course. Everyone hears something, aren't they? You'll forgive me if I don't keep track of every investor's assistant. Serena shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Bianca. But Bianca didn't stop. She was too far gone. too drunk on status, too sure that the night belonged to her. The room was watching now, and she refused to feel small. Robert's calm, steady silence unnerved her. He didn't respond, didn't flinch. He just stood there, composed, dignified, looking at her as if seeing straight through the glitter and the arrogance. And that was the problem. No one had ever looked at Bianca Richardson like that. Not as a socialite, not as a trophy, not as untouchable. He looked at her as if she were something else entirely. Small. Her smile hardened. "Don't just stand there staring at me," she snapped, voice slicing through the music. The crowd nearby stilled, the sound of the band blurring into nothing. Bianca lifted her glass, crimson Cabernet catching the chandelier's light, and before anyone could stop her, tilted it forward. The wine cascaded down Robert Jules's tailored suit in one smooth, horrifying motion. Red against charcoal, blood against silk. The gasp that followed was collective, a sharp, indrawn breath from every corner of the room. Time fractured. The band fell silent. Phones rose. Cameras blinked. Bianca stood frozen, glass trembling in her hand. Somewhere deep inside, reality began to flicker, but it was too late. Robert reached in his pocket, withdrew a white handkerchief, and dabbed gently at his sleeve. When he finally looked up, his eyes were calm, impossibly calm. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't curse. He simply said, softly, "You've said more than enough, Mrs. Richardson." The words landed heavier than any shout could have. Then he turned, straightened his jacket, and walked toward the stage, leaving behind the woman who, in one careless moment, had shattered her husband's empire and her own illusion of power. For a long, unbearable moment, no one moved. The music had died mid-note, leaving only the echo of Bianca's voice still hanging in the air, sharp, cruel, unforgettable. The red wine had spread like a wound across Robert Jules's jacket, the dark liquid dripping to the marble floor in slow, deliberate drops. Bianca's hand still clutched the stem of her empty glass. She told herself she'd done nothing wrong, that the man had provoked her, that it was all some terrible misunderstanding. But deep down, she could feel it, that electric crack in the air, the shift of every gaze toward her. The silence wasn't on her side. Then, mercifully, the MC's voice cut through the tension. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his cheerful tone wobbling, "thank you for your patience. Before dinner is served, we're honored to welcome our keynote speaker and guest of honor, a visionary in global investment and innovation, Mr. Robert Jules, CEO of Jules Global Holdings." The name struck like a thunderclap. Bianca's fingers went slack. The glass slipped from her hand, shattering at her feet. All around the ballroom, heads turned toward her, then toward him. The man now calmly making his way to the stage, his wet suit gleaming under the chandeliers. A slow, horrified realization spread through the crowd like wildfire. Serena Vaughn pressed a hand to her mouth. "Oh my God," she whispered. James Richardson, across the room, turned just in time to see his wife pale to the color of ash. Robert Jules ascended the stage with quiet composure, the kind that didn't demand attention. It commanded it. A server tried to offer him a towel. He declined with a polite nod. Instead, he adjusted his jacket, glanced at the audience, and smiled. Not warmly, not coldly, but with a control that radiated strength. The applause that followed was hesitant, confused, but inevitable. The cameras were already rolling. Bianca's world narrowed to a pinpoint. He reached the podium, rested his hands on either side, and let the silence stretch, the kind of silence that makes people lean forward without realizing it. "Good evening," he began, his voice calm, deep, resonant. "It's an honor to be here among so many talented leaders and visionaries." A murmur swept through the room, but he continued, unbothered. "Tonight is about partnership, about what it means to build together, to grow together, and to lead with integrity." He paused, scanning the audience. His gaze passed over Bianca without lingering, but she felt it all the same, the weight of his restraint, the mercy in his silence. "In my years in business," he went on, I've learned that success is not measured by wealth or recognition, but by character. True leadership isn't about who you can look down on. He paused, just long enough for the words to sink in. It's about who you can lift up. A ripple moved through the room. Phones lifted higher, recording. Every partnership we form, Robert continued, is built not just on profit, but on respect. And respect, my friends, is the one currency that never loses value. His tone never rose, but it carried. It filled every corner of the ballroom, cutting through the air like a sermon. In that moment, the red wine drying on his suit became a symbol, not of humiliation, but of grace under fire. Every person in that room knew it. Every camera caught it. Bianca's vision blurred. She could feel the heat of every gaze pressing against her. Curiosity, disgust, pity. Her pulse thudded in her ears. She wanted to shrink, to vanish behind her diamond necklace and her perfect smile, but both had lost their power. Across the room, James's phone buzzed relentlessly. A partner had already texted him, "Tell me this isn't what it looks like." Robert's voice softened as he concluded. We live in an age where perception often outweighs principle. But integrity, real integrity, doesn't need a shout. It shows itself in how we treat others when no one is watching. The applause that followed was thunderous, but not for Bianca. Robert stepped down from the stage to a sea of handshakes and respect. Every investor, every journalist, every board member wanted a moment of his attention. He gave it, calmly, generously, before quietly excusing himself from the crowd. As he passed Bianca's table, she couldn't bring herself to look up. The air around her had grown suffocating. Serena sat frozen beside her, staring straight ahead. When James finally reached her, his voice was barely above a whisper. "What did you do?" Bianca swallowed, but no words came. Outside, the flash of cameras was already erupting again. This time not for glamour, but for scandal. The video, already uploaded by a quick guest, was spreading across platforms faster than wildfire. The caption beneath it read, "Millionaire's wife pours wine on black CEO at Manhattan Gala." By the time the Richardsons stepped out of the Rosemont's golden doors, the city had already turned its eyes toward them, not with envy, but outrage. And in the shadows of flashing lights, Bianca finally felt it. The first chill of a storm that would wash away everything she thought untouchable. By sunrise, Manhattan was already awake, but not the way it wanted to be. The Rosemont Hotel had emptied hours ago, yet its ballrooms still echoed across every screen in the city. The clip, 28 seconds of humiliation, silence, and red wine, had become the newest digital wildfire. It started on a guest's Instagram story, then jumped to Twitter, TikTok, and the morning news. By 8 a.m., it had its own name. #WinegateNYC. The video had everything the internet craved: a lavish setting, a beautiful villain, and the kind of casual cruelty that made for perfect outrage. Millions watched as Bianca Richardson, wife of real estate magnate James Richardson, sneered, lifted her glass, and poured wine over a black man's head, only to learn seconds later that he was Robert Jules, billionaire CEO of Jules Global Holdings. Entitlement in evening wear, one commentator tweeted. Privilege caught in 4K, another wrote. By breakfast, the clip had been viewed 12 million times. News anchors dissected it in looping segments. Who is Bianca Richardson? What this viral moment says about racism among America's elite. Will Jules Global pull out of the $2 billion deal? Every network wanted a soundbite. Every morning show wanted a guest expert. And every screen in the Richardson penthouse glowed with the proof that their lives had changed overnight. James Richardson stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of their Upper East Side home, phone in hand, watching his empire unravel in real time. His inbox was flooded, subject lines like urgent meeting, investor withdrawal, crisis response. His assistant's texts came in rapid-fire bursts. Stock down 14% pre-market. Press outside building. Jules Global issued a statement. That last one froze him. He opened the link. A simple white background. Black text. No logo. No theatrics. At Jules Global, we believe partnerships must be built on mutual respect. When that foundation doesn't exist, no amount of money can replace it. No threats, no anger, just clarity, quiet and devastating. James dropped the phone onto the marble counter and rubbed his temples. His empire, the one he'd built over 20 years of handshakes, strategy, and sleepless nights, was now being dismantled by a 30-second clip and a single sentence. "James!" Bianca's voice floated in from the bedroom. He turned. She appeared in the doorway, robe cinched tight, hair perfectly arranged despite the storm. She looked calm, unnervingly calm, as if last night had been nothing more than bad press. "Have you seen what they're saying?" she asked, pouring herself coffee like it was any other morning. "They're twisting everything. I didn't even say anything racist. It was a misunderstanding." James stared at her, disbelief tightening his jaw. "You poured wine on him, Bianca. I thought he was staff. He's the CEO of the firm we were merging with." She rolled her eyes, dismissing the gravity like an inconvenience. "Well, how was I supposed to know? He was standing near the servers. Anyone could have made that mistake." James's voice cracked, half rage, half heartbreak. "No, Bianca. Not anyone. Just someone who refuses to see past the mirror." She froze, her composure fracturing. "Don't you start. You're supposed to be defending me, not joining the mob." He gestured toward the TV. Every major outlet now displayed her face, framed by unflattering freeze frames and brutal headlines. "Millionaire's wife humiliates black CEO in viral gala scandal. From glamour to disgrace. The fall of the Richardsons. Entitlement has a new face." James turned off the screen. "You don't get it. This isn't about public opinion. It's about principle. He gave me a chance, us a chance, to prove we could lead with integrity. And now," he exhaled, his voice trembling. "Now it's gone." Bianca crossed her arms, defensive. "You're overreacting. This will blow over in a week." "It always does." But even as she said it, her phone buzzed. A new notification from her social media manager. She opened it, and her breath hitched. Her face, mid-smirk, glass tilted, was now plastered across memes, think pieces, and international headlines. Someone had overlaid the text. "Know your place. The fall of privilege, 2025. Her hand trembled. James watched her crumble for the first time, just slightly, and something in him broke, too. He'd spent his life building things. Towers, deals, legacies. But there was no rebuilding from this. The phone rang again. His CFO. He answered, listening in silence. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, hollow. "Understood." He hung up. "The board wants an emergency meeting," he said quietly. "They're pulling out of the Jules deal. Investors want to reassess our leadership structure. They think we're a liability." Bianca's eyes widened. "A liability?" "Yes," he said, meeting her gaze. "Because of you." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Outside, the city pulsed on. Uncaring, relentless, already moving on to its next scandal. But inside the penthouse, the silence was suffocating. Bianca set her coffee down, her voice barely a whisper. "They'll forgive us. They have to." James looked at her, eyes hollow. The internet doesn't forgive. And Robert Jules doesn't forget. The first headlines had called it a scandal. By nightfall, it would be called something else. The collapse of the Richardsons. The conference room was silent except for the sound of the video. That same 28 seconds of horror, looping endlessly across the wall-sized screen. Red wine splashed. Gasps. The stillness afterward. Then again, and again. James Richardson sat at the head of the table, hands folded, jaw tight. He had watched the clip more times than he could count, but somehow it hit harder each time. The humiliation, the disbelief, the realization that the fall of his empire had been captured in high definition. Around him, the board members looked hollow, their eyes darting between him and the screen. These were men and women who had stood beside him through market crashes, political storms, and ruthless acquisitions. But this was something no business plan could fix. "Turn it off," James said finally, his voice low. No one moved. It was Victor Lang, the company's chief legal officer, who finally broke the silence. "It's gone too far to contain. Every network's running it. Every client's seen it. There's no controlling the narrative now. James leaned back, rubbing his temples. We issue a statement. A formal apology. Damage control. James, interrupted Ellen Park, one of his senior investors, her tone sharp but not unkind. This isn't about statements. It's about survival. If we stay tied to you, we lose everything. The words landed like a blade. Across the table, the head of PR slid a folder toward him. Inside were the numbers, plunging stock values, terminated contracts, a projected loss north of $800 million in a single week. And at the bottom, partnership with Jules Global Holdings, canceled. James closed the folder, hands trembling slightly. Did you speak to Robert Jules personally? The PR head hesitated. We tried. He declined the meeting. James looked up, searching for something to hold on to. Declined or refused? A beat of silence. He said there's nothing left to discuss. The room exhaled collectively. Ellen folded her hands. Robert's already signed with another developer, Fairmont Urban Group. The deal's being restructured under a new diversity initiative. Same value, same markets. Just not us. James felt the air leave his lungs. That deal had been his life's work, the bridge to a global legacy. And now, it belonged to someone else. He looked around the table at the executives who once called him a visionary. Now they looked at him the way people look at the ruins of a fire, pitying, distant, already moving on. So that's it, he said quietly. After everything we've built, you're ready to throw me to the wolves? It's not about you, Victor said. It's about the brand. The name Richardson Estates has become toxic. The investors are demanding action. They want a clean slate before the damage spreads further. James swallowed hard. What kind of action? Ellen took a breath. Effective immediately, the board is voting to suspend your role as CEO, pending public rehabilitation and a full ethics review. The words felt unreal, heavy and bureaucratic, but final. James looked at the faces around the table. None met his eyes. One by one, hands went up. The vote was unanimous. He didn't argue. He didn't plead. He simply sat back, nodded once, and said, "Understood." The screen behind him froze on the final frame of the video. Bianca's smirk, glass-tipped, red wine Madeira. The image that had destroyed them both. Outside the building, the world was feeding on their downfall. News vans lined the street. Reporters shouted questions as security held them back. "Mr. Richardson, do you condone your wife's behavior? Are you stepping down voluntarily? Has Jules Global blacklisted your company?" James pushed through the crowd in silence. Cameras flashed, catching every line of exhaustion on his face. By the time he reached the car, his phone buzzed again, a message from an old colleague at Jules Global. "Robert wanted me to tell you this wasn't personal, but was necessary." He stared at the message for a long time, then typed a simple reply. "Tell him I understand." Back at the penthouse, chaos had its own rhythm. Tabloids littered the front steps. Drones hovered outside the windows. Every gossip site had a new theory, that Bianca was in hiding, that James was leaving her, that the Richardson empire had fallen faster than any corporate dynasty in recent memory. Inside, Bianca sat in the living room, surrounded by half-empty glasses and a phone that wouldn't stop buzzing. Her friends, or former friends, had all gone silent. Invitations revoked. Accounts unfollowed. Silence from every corner that once adored her. When James walked in, suitcase in hand, she looked up sharply. "Where are you going?" He didn't answer right away. He set the suitcase by the door, glanced around the penthouse. The art, the marble, the glittering reminders of a life built on image. Finally, he turned to her. "I can fix a company," he said softly. "I can't fix you." She blinked, confused, as though the meaning hadn't quite registered. "You're leaving? You can't just walk out, James. The press will." He shook his head. "The press already did." Without another word, he walked out, closing the door behind him. The echo lingered. For the first time, Bianca was truly alone, and the silence that followed wasn't luxury. It was consequence. Outside, the headlines screamed of collapse. Inside, she finally felt it. Winter had come early to New York. The city outside Bianca Richardson's new apartment looked gray and tired, much like her reflection in the streaked window pane. Gone were the marble floors, the concierge greetings, the soft scent of imported lilies that used to perfume her mornings. The new place smelled faintly of dust and reheated takeout, and the radiator clanked like it resented her presence. It had been 6 months since the gala. 6 months since the wine, the video, the ruin. The penthouse was sold off to cover mounting debts. Her credit cards were frozen, her jewelry locked away by court order, and her name, once printed in glossy magazines, now appeared only in gossip columns about the fall of the Richardsons. James had filed for divorce quietly. He didn't contest, didn't fight. He simply walked away. The only thing more painful than the public collapse of their marriage had been the silence that followed. Bianca still scrolled through old photos sometimes, the charity galas, the yacht parties, the radiant smile she used to wear like armor. Now, she barely recognized the woman in those images. A knock at the door startled her. It was her manager, or rather, the last person willing to call themselves that. "Bianca, I got you a spot," he said, dropping his tablet on the table. "Daytime show. National audience. They're giving you a chance to apologize. Clean slate, narrative control, redemption arc. You need this." She hesitated. "Redemption arc? I didn't kill anyone." He gave her a look. "You killed your own brand." Bianca didn't flinch, but she didn't argue either. The studio lights were merciless. They caught every flaw she'd tried to conceal with makeup. The sleepless nights, the stress, the hollow beneath her cheekbones. Across from her sat the host, a woman with a calm smile and the kind of piercing eyes that made even celebrities squirm. "Mrs. Richardson," the host began smoothly, "the world saw something that night that shocked people. Not just because of what you did, but because of what it represented. What would you say to those who felt personally hurt or offended by your actions?" Bianca smiled tightly. "I think people misunderstood what happened. It was a chaotic night. I was under pressure. People make mistakes." The host's eyebrow arched slightly. "A mistake, or a mindset?" Bianca's voice stiffened. "I come from a world where etiquette matters. There was a miscommunication. It wasn't about race. It was about behavior." A murmur rippled through the audience. The host leaned forward. "But your behavior was the problem, wasn't it?" Bianca's practiced smile faltered. For a moment, she looked cornered, then defensive. "I've apologized publicly. I can't undo it. But this constant vilification, this cancel culture, it's cruel." By the end of the segment, her attempt at redemption had dissolved into a masterclass in tone deafness. Within hours, social media was ablaze again. Hashtag Bianca Not Sorry trended worldwide. The networks replayed the most damning clips. Her deflection, her entitlement, her refusal to truly see. When her manager called the next morning, his voice was weary. "That interview buried you." Weeks later, the court assigned her to community service, 200 hours at a housing nonprofit in Harlem. "Consider it restorative action," the judge had said. The first morning, she arrived in designer sunglasses and a trench coat, still clinging to fragments of her old self. The volunteer coordinator, a middle-aged woman named Loretta, handed her gloves and a clipboard without ceremony. "Sort donations," she said, "and lose the attitude." We all saw the video. Bianca worked quietly for the first week, sorting clothes and canned food, keeping to herself. But she couldn't ignore the people around her, the single mothers, the retired veterans, the teenagers rebuilding their neighborhoods. They greeted her with kindness she didn't deserve. One afternoon, she overheard 2 volunteers talking about a new housing project being funded nearby. "That Jules Global Group's behind it," one said. "Finally, someone's doing something that matters." The name hit her like a punch. Robert Jules. Still building. Still leading. Still everything her world wasn't. That night, as she walked home past murals and brownstones, something inside her began to shift. For the first time, she didn't feel angry. She felt ashamed. Not because she'd been caught, but because she'd finally seen what kind of person she had become. Arrogance had been her language. Entitlement, her armor. And when the world took it all away, what was left wasn't tragedy. It was truth. Bianca Richardson, once the queen of champagne and status, now stood quietly among people who had never owned either. And for the first time in her life, she began to listen. Spring had come back to New York, but for Bianca Richardson, it didn't feel like renewal. it felt like quiet survival. The air smelled faintly of rain and concrete dust from construction sites that dotted Harlem's edges. She'd been volunteering for nearly 3 months now at the Urban Roots Renewal Project, a nonprofit building affordable housing and community gardens. At first, she counted the hours, literally. Every shift, every lunch break, every minute she swept the floor or sorted paintbrushes. But somewhere along the way, time had stopped being punishment. She'd started arriving early, staying late, listening. The woman who once dined beneath chandeliers now spent her days painting walls in sun-faded overalls, her hair tied back, her nails short and unpolished. The irony wasn't lost on her. She used to own properties like these. Now she helped rebuild them. And somehow, it felt more honest than anything she'd ever done. She had learned everyone's names. Loretta, the no-nonsense coordinator who'd first handed her a mop without pity. Malik, a teenage volunteer who reminded her that strength didn't come from status. Even the construction foreman, who once refused to shake her hand after recognizing her from the viral video, now nodded in quiet acknowledgement when she passed. Each day stripped another layer of her old self away. What remained wasn't glamorous, but it was real. It was a Tuesday morning when the news came. Loretta burst into the office, clipboard in hand. "Big day, folks. We're getting a visit from our main investor, the man who made this project possible." Bianca looked up from the paperwork she'd been sorting. "Investor?" Loretta grinned. "Robert Jules. You've probably heard of him." The world tilted, just slightly but enough. Bianca felt her throat tighten. She hadn't heard his name spoken aloud in months, though it had haunted every quiet corner of her mind. For a moment, she considered leaving, pretending to be sick, to vanish before he arrived. But she didn't. Not this time. By noon, the site buzzed with nervous energy. The volunteers lined up near the freshly painted row of apartments, their faces proud, their hands dusty. A sleek black SUV pulled up to the curb, and when the door opened, out stepped Robert Jules. He looked exactly as she remembered, poised, calm, impeccably dressed. But there was something different in the way he carried himself now, lighter, perhaps. The power he exuded wasn't showy. It was quiet, certain, earned. He shook hands with the staff, asked questions about the project, smiled at the children who ran by. Every eye was drawn to him. And then he saw her. Bianca froze. For a second, neither of them moved. The world seemed to contract. All the noise, the hammering, the chatter, fading into silence. She removed her gloves, wiping the dust from her palms, and stepped forward. "Mr. Jules," she began softly, her voice barely above a whisper. She swallowed. "I wanted to say I'm sorry. It wasn't a rehearsed apology. It wasn't defensive or polished. Just raw. Small. True." Robert regarded her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. The silence stretched, but it wasn't cruel. Finally, he said, "Everyone deserves a second chance, but not everyone earns one." He didn't linger. He simply turned to greet the next volunteer, leaving Bianca standing there, not wounded, but awake. His words didn't sting. They settled, like truth often does. For the first time, she didn't feel like she was being punished. She felt accountable. Weeks later, the Urban Roots team hosted a fundraising dinner in one of the newly finished community centers. It was small, nothing like the glittering galas Bianca once attended. The tables were covered in mismatched linens, the lights warm and soft. Music floated through the air, a local jazz trio, not an orchestra. Bianca moved among the guests with a tray of glasses, refilling wine and water. Her hands were steady. No cameras, no diamonds, no flashbulbs. Just laughter, gratitude, and purpose. At one point, a little girl tugged at her sleeve. "Miss Bianca, you missed a glass over there." Bianca smiled. "Thank you, sweetheart." She crossed the room and gently refilled a guest's glass, careful not to spill a drop. For a fleeting moment, she thought about that night at the Rosemont Hotel. The crimson stain, the silence, the shame. How one careless pour had unraveled everything. Now, under the hum of soft light, she poured again, not in arrogance, but in service. The act was the same. The meaning was entirely different. As the evening drew to a close, Bianca stood by the window, watching the city skyline shimmer in the distance. Her old world still glittering but distant now, like a story she'd outgrown. Once, she believed power came from being seen. Now, she understood it came from seeing others. And somewhere beyond the rooftops, in one of those tall glass towers, Robert Jules likely never thought of her again. But she thought of him, not with bitterness, not with shame, but with gratitude. Because losing everything had given her the one thing she'd never truly had before: herself. Thank you for staying to the very end. If this one amazed you, I promise, the next story will captivate you even more. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. See you in the next one.